My name is Claire Mitchell, a 27-year-old lieutenant in the United States Navy, and this is the story of how my life fell apart in a single summer day while I was thousands of miles from home, serving on the USS Roosevelt. I grew up in a small town in Maine, where the ocean was always my calling. My father served in the Navy for 30 years before retiring as a captain. Following in his footsteps felt as natural as breathing. I graduated from Annapolis with honors, determined to build my own career, my own legacy. The sea was always where I felt most at home. The discipline, the hierarchy, the sense of purpose, all of it fulfilled me in a way that civilian life never could. I was respected, competent, confident in my uniform. I had clear plans for my future, to rise through the ranks, perhaps to command my own ship one day. I thought I had it all under control. Then I met Ryan Blackwood, a freelance photographer with a devastating smile and a way of making me laugh that broke down all my defenses. We met during my last leave in San Diego at a cafe near the base. He was photographing birds on the beach and went inside to escape a sudden downpour. He sat at the next table, talked about my book, a naval biography that few civilians would be interested in, and somehow 3 hours passed in the blink of an eye. It was supposed to be just a furlough flight, a few weeks of fun before heading back to sea. But we fell in love, quickly and intensely, like a storm I didn't see coming. For 6 months, we maintained a long-distance relationship that worked surprisingly well. Video calls when I had a connection, long, passionate emails when I didn't. Ryan understood my career, respected my dedication, and never pressured me to choose between him and the Navy, or so I thought. The proposal came when I returned for a 2-week leave. One night on the beach, with the California sunset painting the sky orange and pink, he knelt in the sand and asked if I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him. I said yes without hesitation. We planned a simple wedding for later in the year when I'd be back from my next deployment. Ryan wanted something small, just close family and a few friends. I was happy to agree. I've never been one to dream of princess dresses or grand celebrations. 2 months later, I set sail on the Roosevelt for a 6-month deployment to the Pacific. The first few weeks were business as usual. The rigid routine of naval life, the responsibilities of my post, the petty politics of living in a confined space with the same crew day after day. I missed Ryan, but I was used to being separated. I had my job, my colleagues, my life. That's when I got the email from my younger sister, Melissa. Claire, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be hard to hear. Ryan is planning your wedding in 3 weeks. I don't know why he changed the date without consulting you, but he's telling everyone you approved the change. It's a huge ceremony. Now, over 200 guests. He's hired a wedding planner, booked that beach resort that costs a fortune. I'm worried. This doesn't feel right. I was shocked. I reread the email several times, trying to understand. There had to be some mistake. Ryan knew I couldn't be at a wedding in 3 weeks. I was in the middle of the Pacific, on an authorized mission. There was no way I could simply excuse myself. I tried calling him that night when I had access to a secure line, but it went to voicemail. I texted, "We need to talk. What's going on with the wedding?" His reply arrived hours later. "Surprise? I got everything done quickly. Don't worry, I'm taking care of every detail. It will be perfect. I've already spoken to your commander about an emergency." My stomach sank. Ryan had never spoken to my commanding officer. That was impossible. What about emergency leave? For a wedding he'd rescheduled without my consent. The Navy didn't work that way. I tried calling again. Nothing. I sent another email, more direct this time. "Ryan, you know I can't leave the ship. We can't get married in 3 weeks. Why did you do this?" His response left me cold. "Claire, everything is already organized. Everyone is excited. Your family has already booked tickets. We can't cancel now. I'm sure if you explain the situation, they'll understand. It's our wedding, for God's sake. Some rules are allowed to be broken." I stayed up all night, nauseous with anxiety. Ryan knew how much my career meant to me. He knew I couldn't just walk away from my post. What was he thinking? The next morning, I got another email, this time from my mom. "Honey, I'm so excited about the wedding. Ryan has been wonderful organizing everything. He mentioned that you might have trouble getting leave. I spoke to your dad and he said he can call some old contacts in the Navy. Don't worry, we'll make it work. I felt a wave of panic and anger. How dare Ryan bring my parents into this? How could he suggest my father use his influence to remove me from active duty? This could ruin not only my reputation, but my father's as well. I sent a final message to Ryan. The wedding is off. I can't marry someone who doesn't respect my career or my decisions. We'll talk when I get back. He didn't answer. I spent the next few days in a numb state of shock, trying to process what had happened. How could I have been so wrong about someone? How could I have missed the signs? A week later, my friend and fellow officer, Sophia, came rushing into my quarters during my free time, holding her tablet as if it contained classified information. Claire, you need to see this now. I looked at the screen and my blood. It was an Instagram post from Ryan. Photos of us together. Some I didn't even know he'd taken with a long, dramatic caption. For those who asked about the wedding, it's off. My fiancé has decided that the Navy is more important than our love. After everything I planned, the sacrifices I made to wait for her between deployment, she simply said no. I think some of you were right when you said that the military and relationships don't mix. I scrolled through the photos in shock. There were dozens of them. Some were intimate moments that should never have been shared publicly. One, particularly disturbing, showed Ryan pulling my hair during what appeared to be a game. But out of context, it looked like something else entirely. The comments were the worst. Hundreds of them, most defending Ryan, calling me every name in the book. Cold bitch, typical military woman, heartless. He deserves better. And then I saw the post spreading. Friends of friends were sharing it. Minor celebrity gossip sites were picking up the story Ryan had some fame in the photography world. Even some military Facebook groups were debating whether I was an example of why women shouldn't be in command positions. My world fell apart in that moment. Not only had my relationship ended in the worst possible way, but my professional reputation was being dragged through the mud. Everything I had worked so hard to build was being questioned by people who didn't know me, based on a completely distorted narrative. The commander called me into his office that afternoon. Fearing the worst, I entered and stood at attention, prepared for any reprimand. "At ease, Lieutenant Mitchell," he said, indicating the chair across from him. "Have a seat." I sat rigidly, maintaining my posture. "I'm aware of the situation with your ex-fiancé," he said bluntly. "I want you to know that the Navy does not tolerate this type of behavior. Online harassment and retaliation are taken seriously, especially when directed at military personnel." I felt a wave of relief, followed immediately by embarrassment. "Sir, I apologize for any embarrassment this may have caused the ship, or..." He raised his hand. "You have nothing to apologize for, Lieutenant. You did nothing wrong. In fact, you did exactly what you should have done, putting your duty first and refusing to compromise the integrity of this mission." He paused. "Our legal team is already aware of the situation and stands ready to offer assistance should you wish to file formal charges." I nodded, speechless. "Furthermore," he continued, "I want you to know that your position here is secure. Your performance remains exemplary, and that is all that matters to me and this Navy." I left his office feeling simultaneously supported and devastated. Supported by my superiors, but devastated by the fact that my personal life had exploded so publicly, even affecting my professional life. That night, I received an email from my father. Direct and blunt, as was always his style. "Claire, your mother is upset, but she'll get over it. As for me, I'm proud of you. Ryan contacted me, trying to convince me to push you. I told him where to put this idea. No man who truly loves you would demand that you compromise your duty. Keep your head up. This storm will pass. With love, Father." I cried for the first time since it all began. Silent tears in the darkness of my bunk as the ship cut through the waters of the Pacific. The next day, I woke with renewed determination. If Ryan wanted to drag me through the mud, I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of defeating me. I threw myself into work, taking on extra shifts when possible, volunteering for additional projects. If I couldn't control the public narrative, at least I could prove who I really was with my action. Weeks passed. The online story eventually cooled, replaced by new dramas, new scandals, but the damage was done. Every time I received an email or message from someone back home, There was an underlying tension, a feeling that I needed to explain or defend my choices. And then, about a month after the initial incident, I received an unexpected email. It was from Helen Shao, a Vanity Fair journalist I had briefly met earlier during a Navy event where she was reporting on women in the military. "Lieutenant Mitchell, I don't know if you remember me, but I've been following the situation with your ex-fiancé. I believe there's an important story to be told here, not about a canceled wedding, but about the unique pressures faced by women in the military and how social media can be weaponized against them. If you're interested in sharing your perspective, I'd love to chat." I stared at the email for a long time. My initial instinct was to decline. The last thing I wanted was more public attention, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that staying silent meant letting Ryan's narrative prevail. I responded by agreeing to a video conference interview the next time I had access to a secure connection. When I finally spoke to Helen, she was professional and compassionate. She wasn't looking for gossip or sordid details. She wanted to understand the real dilemma I had faced between my commitment to my duty and the expectations of someone who supposedly loved me. "What do you think this situation reveals about the expectations placed on military women?" she asked. I thought carefully before answering. "I think it reveals a dual expectation. We are praised for our dedication and service, but simultaneously, we are expected to put personal relationships above our professional commitment in a way that is rarely expected of military men. When a man prioritizes his duty, it is seen as honorable. When a woman does the same, she is often labeled as cold or heartless." The interview lasted almost 2 hours. I talked about my career, my relationship with Ryan, and the pressure I felt when he tried to force me to resign. I talked about how his social media campaign was a form of violence, an attempt to punish me for not giving in to his demands. 2 weeks later, the article was published. "Duty and Devotion: The Price of Service for Military Women." It was fair, well-researched, and included not only my story but those of other military women who had faced similar dilemmas. Helen had interviewed experts on online harassment, military lawyers, and even a respectful ex-fiancé of another officer who spoke eloquently about the challenges of loving someone on active duty. The response was overwhelming. I received hundreds of messages of support from other military women, from veterans, from civilians who simply appreciated a more nuanced perspective on the situation. Many women shared their own stories of being pressured to choose between career and relationship. Ryan, for his part, faced intense backlash. His attempt to portray me as the villain backfired. Clients canceled assignments. Fellow photographers publicly distanced themselves from him. The same social media platforms he had used to attack me were now full of criticism of his behavior. He tried to make a public apology, claiming he'd acted emotionally, that he still loved me, and that he'd made a terrible mistake, but it was too late. I'd already moved on. In fact, the whole experience strengthened me in unexpected ways. It made me realize how much I truly valued my career, not just as a job, but as a fundamental part of who I was. It made me appreciate the true allies in my life, my father, my fellow officers, friends who never doubted me. More importantly, it freed me from a relationship that, I realized in retrospect, had warning signs I'd ignored. Ryan always expressed admiration for my career, but always with the subtext that it was a phase, as something I'd eventually move on from once we really established as a couple. I finished my 6-month mission with a newfound clarity and purpose. When I finally returned to American soil, I faced some uncomfortable situations, stares and whispers from people who recognized me from the online drama, but I also found renewed respect from many of my colleagues. My commanding officer recommended me for a position of greater responsibility on my next assignment. Lieutenant Mitchell demonstrated exceptional strength of character under extreme personal pressure, his evaluation read. His dedication to duty and professional integrity are exemplary. As for Ryan, I learned from mutual friends that he had moved from San Diego to New York, presumably to start over in a place where his reputation didn't precede him. Sometimes, on the rare nights I allow myself to reflect on what happened, I still feel a pang of sadness for what could have been. There were genuine moments of connection and happiness between us, but then I remembered the impossible ultimatum. the intimate photos exposed to the world, the attempt to manipulate my family against me, and the sadness is replaced by a profound certainty. I escaped something toxic. 6 months after the Vanity Fair article, I received another unexpected email. It was from the Naval Academy, asking if I would be interested in a temporary position as an instructor, speaking to cadets about leadership and ethics. Specifically, they wanted me to address how to navigate difficult personal situations without compromising professional duty. I accepted immediately. If my painful experience could help other young officers avoid similar pitfalls, then it would have been worth it in some way. My first lecture was to a class of third-year cadets, about 100 young women and men sitting stiffly in their uniform, watching me with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Many of you have probably heard my story. I began, deciding to address the elephant in the room immediately. It's been spread across the internet, distorted and sensationalized. Today, I want to tell the real story, not to garner sympathy or vilify my ex, but because I believe there are valuable lessons here for future officers. I saw a few nods, glances exchanged between cadets. The most important thing I want you to take away from this today is this. At some point in your career, you will likely face a choice between your duty and something you deeply love, a relationship, an opportunity, a personal dream. And when that moment comes, the choice will never be easy or clear. I spent the next hour sharing not only my story, but also discussing the broader challenges of balancing personal life and military. I talked about recognizing healthy relationships versus controlling one. I discussed the specific pressures military women often face. I touched on how social media had changed the landscape of our private lives. When I finished and opened it up for questions, a young cadet raised her hand. "Lieutenant, after everything that happened, do you regret the choice you made? Do you think it was worth it?" I looked at her, so young, so serious, probably worried about her own future and the choices she would have to make. "I don't regret choosing my duty," I answered honestly. "I regret not recognizing sooner that I was with someone incapable of honoring that duty." True love doesn't require you to abandon who you are or what you value. It supports you, even when it's hard. I saw several cadets nodding, some taking notes. As for whether it was worth it, I continued, "I can't answer that definitively. I lost someone I thought I loved. I went through public humiliation. It was painful in ways I wouldn't wish on anyone, but I also discovered my own strength, gained clarity about my priorities, and perhaps, through the article and conversations like this, helped others navigate similar situations. If that's worth it, then yes, it was." After the talk, several cadets approached me individually. Some shared their own stories of difficult relationships with civilians who didn't understand military. Others simply wanted to express gratitude for my candor. One cadet in particular stayed last, waiting until everyone else had left. "Lieutenant Mitchell," she said, her voice low and intense, "I just wanted to say thank you. I'm in a relationship. I now with someone who constantly makes me feel guilty for choosing the academy over a college closer to home. He always talks about how I'm choosing the Navy over him. After hearing your story, I realized that's not love. It's manipulation." I felt a lump in my throat. "You deserve someone who supports your dreams, cadet. Someone who understands that your commitment to service doesn't diminish your love for them." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'll break up with him when I get home this weekend." After that day, lectures at the academy became a regular part of my responsibilities while ashore. Over time, my online story was replaced by my actual work, my performance as an officer, my contributions as an instructor, the articles I began writing for military publications on leadership and resilience. Ryan eventually apologized properly, not publicly, to restore his image, but in a private email years later. "Claire," he wrote, "I have spent a lot of time reflecting on my behavior and seeking help to understand why I reacted the way I did. There is no excuse for what I did. It was cruel, selfish, and unfair. You deserved better, and I deeply regret the pain I caused. I neither expect nor ask for your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I fully acknowledge my mistakes." I replied briefly, thanking him for his message and wishing him well. There was nothing more to say. Today, 5 years after that fateful summer, I am Lieutenant Captain Claire Mitchell. I recently took command of my first ship, a moment of immense pride for me and my family. At the transfer of command ceremony, my father, now completely white-haired, but still imposing in his formal dress uniform, was the first to salute. "Captain Mitchell," he said, his eyes shining with pride. "The ship is ready and awaiting your orders." I returned his salute, fighting the emotion that threatened to shatter my professional composure. My mother was in the audience, as were several friends and colleagues who had supported me through the most difficult times. Sophia, now also a lieutenant captain on her own path to command, smiled broadly at me from her seat among the invited officers. There was no romantic partner by my side that day. I'd had a few relationships over the years, but none that had evolved into anything serious. Not for lack of interest or fear after my experience with Ryan, but simply because my focus was elsewhere on my career, on my development as a leader, on the lives of the sailors under my command. If Ryan saw the news about my promotion and new command, I never knew. His name rarely crosses my mind now, except as a distant reminder of a painful but necessary lesson. That night, after the ceremony, I stood alone on the deck of my ship, looking out at the ocean that had always called to me. The sky was clear, the stars reflected in the dark water below. I felt a sense of belonging. I don't know what the future holds. More missions, certainly. Maybe a new relationship someday, with someone who understands and respects who I am and what I do. Perhaps more career advancement, more responsibilities, new challenges to overcome. What I know for sure is this: I chose my path consciously, with my eyes open to both its costs and its rewards. It's not a path everyone will understand or respect, but it's mine. The photos from that terrible day still exist somewhere in the vast internet archive. Sometimes, someone new in my life discovers them and comes to ask me about them, cautious curiosity in their eyes. I don't hide the story. I'm not ashamed of it. I tell the truth that I once loved someone who tried to force me to choose him and my duty, and that I chose my duty, that I suffered for that choice, but that I never doubted it. And then I move on, to the next horizon, the next challenge, the next chapter of the life I choose to live. As my father always said, you can have love and the sea, you just need to find someone willing to sail with you, not someone who demands you anchor permanently. I'm still sailing, still searching, and until I find that someone, if they exist, and at peace with the ocean, with duty, and with the person I've become through the storms I've weathered. Sometimes, at dusk, when the sun dips below the horizon and paints the sky the same colors as the day Ryan proposed, I think about how one decision can completely change the course of a life. If I had given in that day, abandoned my post for a wedding I hadn't planned, where would I be now? Who would I be? I'll never know the answers to those questions, and honestly, I don't need to know, because the decision I made brought me here, to this deck, to this command, to this life that, with all its challenges and occasional loneliness, is truly mine. And that, in the end, is what matters. The day after the transfer of command ceremony, I woke before dawn in my new stateroom. It was strange to think that this space was now mine, not just temporary quarters, but the concrete symbol of my authority and responsibility. The metal walls, the compact bunk, the small but functional desk, everything was the same as I'd known, yet somehow completely different now. I went through my morning routine with the efficiency I'd honed over the years. Quick exercises in the cramped confines of my cabin, a short shower, and an impeccably tailored uniform. When I stepped out into the hallway, the sailor on duty immediately straightened up. "Good morning, Captain." "Good morning, Petty Officer Ramirez. Report?" As he updated me on the peaceful night, I felt the weight of the title. Captain. No longer Lieutenant Mitchell, but Captain Mitchell. Responsible not only for my own actions and decisions, but for the lives of everyone on board, for the accomplishment of the mission, for the integrity of the ship. My first day as captain was a mix of meetings, inspections, and formal introductions. I met each department head individually, setting the tone for our working relationship. I made a point of visiting each section of the ship, even if only briefly, so the crew could see my face, so they knew I wouldn't be a captain hiding in her cabin. In the cafeteria, during lunch, a young sailor timidly approached my table. "Excuse me, Captain Mitchell. I just wanted to say it's an honor to serve under your command. I read the article about you in Vanity Fair when I was a senior in high school. It was One of the reasons I enlisted, I was momentarily speechless. It was one thing to know intellectually that my story had touched people. It was quite another to meet someone whose life had been directly influenced by it. "What's your name, sailor?" I asked, regaining my composure. "Slender man." "Elena Delgado." "Well, Seaman Delgado, it's an honor to have you on the crew. I hope your experience in the Navy meets your expectations." She smiled. "So far, you're getting through it, man." After she left, I wondered what a strange path life takes, how something as painful as my fiasco with Ryan years later have inspired a young woman to pursue a career she might not have otherwise considered. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time. It was a habit I'd started after the incident, initially as a form of therapy recommended by the Navy psychologist I'd consulted, and which had grown into a regular practice of reflection. "First day as a captain," I wrote. "Terrifying and exhilarating in equal parts. I met a young sailor today who said she enlisted because of me. What a responsibility that brings, not only for the ship and the mission, but as an example to others. I hope I rise to The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity as we prepared for our first mission under my command. It would be a routine patrol in the Eastern Mediterranean, but I was determined to execute it with perfect precision. I spent hours reviewing shipping routes, studying intelligence reports, and checking and rechecking supply lists. My first mate, Commander James Torres, a 15-year veteran, walked into my office one night to find me hunched over maps and reports. "Captain, if I may be frank, you are preparing for this mission as if it were an invasion of Normandy." I looked at him, ready to defend myself, but his tone wasn't critical. There was an underlying respect, maybe even a touch of amusement. "First mission as Commander Torres. I don't want to leave anything to chance." He nodded. "Understandable, ma'am. But I'd like to remind you that we have an extremely competent team. You don't need to personally check every detail," I sighed, rubbing my tired eyes. "Old habits are hard to break. I've always been meticulous. It's undoubtedly one of the reasons you reached this position so young," he said, then paused before adding, "But command also means delegating, trusting your team." He was right, of course. Part of the transition from line officer to commander was learning to see the big picture, to trust that the details would be taken care of by the specialists trained to do so. "Message received, Commander. I'll try not to micromanage. I'm not suggesting you compromise your high standards," he clarified. "Just ... spread the burden a bit." Torres left, and I reflected on his words. It was a different kind of challenge, not to prove my competence by doing everything myself, but to demonstrate effective leadership by allowing others to demonstrate their own competence. The morning we set sail, I stood on the bridge, watching San Diego slowly disappear into the horizon. There was something symbolic about that moment, leaving behind not only the harbor, but also a previous version of myself. 2 weeks later, we were in the Mediterranean. The mission was running smoothly, routines established, and the crew was adapting to my leadership style. Demanding, but fair. Maintaining high standards while recognizing good work. Then I got the email from Ryan. 5 years of silence since that brief exchange after his apology. And now this, appearing in my inbox like a ghost from a previous life. The subject line was simple: "Congratulations." I hesitated before opening it, briefly considering deleting it without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Claire, a friend shared the news about your command. I just wanted to offer my sincere congratulations. It's an impressive and well-deserved achievement. I know it's probably strange to hear from me after so long, and I completely understand if you'd rather not respond. I just wanted you to know that, from afar, I'm genuinely happy for success. Ryan." I stared at the message for a long time, conflicting feelings welling up. I felt no animosity toward Ryan. That wound had long since healed, but I also felt no meaningful connection with him, no desire to reopen any kind of communication. In the end, I replied with polite brevity, "Ryan, thank you for the congratulations. I hope life is treating you well." Claire, short, simple, without inviting further conversation. And with that, I closed that chapter once again. The next day, something unexpected happened. We were ordered to divert from our planned patrol and respond to an SOS from a private yacht that had lost power during a sudden storm. It wasn't uncommon for Navy ships to assist in civil emergencies, but it was the first time I'd faced such a situation as a commander. Estimated time of arrival at the yacht's last known position. I asked the navigation officer. 1 hour and 20 minutes, Captain, if we maintain maximum speed. Do so, and inform the Italian Coast Guard that we are responding. Conditions worsened as we approached. The sea was rough, the winds reaching storm speed. The yacht, identified as the Aurora, registered in Malta with 5 people on board, had not issued any further communications since the initial SOS. When we finally spotted the boat, it was clearly in distress, rocking dangerously in the ever-rising wave, seemingly adrift. "Prepare the rescue team," I ordered, "and keep trying to establish radio contact." Even with our advanced equipment, the conditions made the rescue operation dangerous. I watched from the bridge as our team prepared the rescue boat. "Captain," Torres said beside me, "with all due respect, I think we should wait for the storm to die down a bit. It's too risky to launch a boat in these conditions." It was the first time he had directly questioned one of my decisions. I looked at the distant yacht, then at the raging waves between us. "How long until the storm passes?" "According to the weather forecast, at least 6 hours until it starts to decrease significantly." I glanced back at the rocking yacht. "They may not have 6 hours, Captain." I saw the concern on her face. "I understand, ma'am, but we also need to consider the lives of our own rescue." It was the kind of decision no captain wants to face, weighing risks against risk, lives against lives. My primary responsibility was to my crew and my ship, but there was also the unwritten code of the sea. You don't leave other sailors in harm's way if there's any way you can help. After a moment of contemplation, I made my decision. Bring the ship as close as is safe. Prepare rescue lines for launching. We will try to bring them aboard without having to launch our boat. Torres nodded, clearly relieved. The next few hours were intense. Maneuvering a destroyer near a yacht adrift in rough seas required extreme precision. Our deck crew worked in brutal conditions, struggling to establish a connection with the smaller vessel. It was a meticulous, dangerous, and exhausting operation. But in the end, we made it. The yacht's 5 occupants, an Italian couple, their 2 teenage children, and a crew member were brought aboard, shivering and exhausted, but alive. When the adrenaline finally subsided and we were back on course, I visited our unwitting guests in the inn, where they were being examined and treated for mild hypothermia. The father, a middle-aged man named Marco Ricci, shook my hand fervently. "Captain, I can't thank you enough. I thought we were going to die today." "Just doing our job, sir," I replied, the cliché slipping out automatically. But then I saw his children, a girl and a boy, maybe 15 and 17, wrapped in thermal blankets, their faces still, etched with fear, and added more sincerely, "We're glad you were able to send that SOS in time." His wife, Lucia, looked at me with teary eyes. It was so scary. When the engine failed and the backup radio wouldn't work, then the waves started getting bigger and bigger. ... "You're safe now," I assured her. "We'll contact the Italian authorities. We'll disembark you at the next safe port." "What will happen to our boat?" asked the teenage son. "Unfortunately, we couldn't save the yacht," I explained gently. "But boats can be replaced. Lives can't." After ensuring they were comfortable and well cared for, I returned to the bridge. Torres was there, supervising our journey back to the designated course. "Good call, Captain," he said quietly. "We achieved the rescue without needlessly endangering ourselves. Thank you, Commander. And thank you for speaking up when you thought I was about to make a risky decision. That's exactly what I need from my XO." He seemed slightly surprised, perhaps expecting me to be defensive about having my decision questioned. But one of the most important lessons I've learned over the years, partly thanks to my experience with Ryan, was recognizing when ego was influencing my decisions versus when I was truly listening to reason. That night, I wrote again in my journal, "First big test as a commander today. Tough decisions under pressure." Reminder to myself, a good leader is not one who always knows all the answers, but one who knows how to listen to the right advice at the right time. The rescue extended our patrol a few days beyond the original schedule, as we had to divert to Naples to disembark the Italian family. I didn't mind. There was a deep sense of satisfaction in knowing that 5 people were alive because of the actions of my ship and crew. When we finally returned to San Diego, almost 2 months after our departure, I found a stack of mail waiting in my apartment. Among the bills in Navy magazines was a formal envelope bearing the Department of the Navy crest. Inside, an invitation. The Secretary of the Navy requests the pleasure of your presence at the annual Navy Ball in Washington, D.C. Normally, I would have politely declined. Formal social events have never been my forte, and preferring operational duties to political ones was one of the reasons I chose the ship command route rather than pursuing a position at the Pentagon. But this time, something gave me pause. Maybe it was time to expand my horizons, make some connections beyond the immediate circle of my career. And I admitted to myself, maybe it would be good to simply get out and socialize, something I had considerably neglected in recent years. I responded by accepting the invitation, and 2 weeks later, I found myself in Washington, in a posh hotel near the National Mall, unpacking my dress uniform and preparing for an evening of small talk and naval politics. The ball was being held at the National Navy Museum, a stunning venue steeped in history and significance. As I entered the main lobby, transformed for the evening with soft lighting and elegant decorations, I couldn't help but feel a pang of intimidation. The ballroom was filled with admirals with their gleaming medals, influential politicians, defense executives, and their immaculately dressed spouses. Captain Mitchell. I turned to see Vice Admiral Peterson approaching, a genuine smile on his face. He had been my commanding officer a few years ago and had always been supportive. Admiral, good to see you, I replied, returning his smile. I heard about your new command and about the rescue in the Mediterranean. Impressive work. Thank you, sir. I had an excellent crew. Ever modest, he said, then turned to the man beside him. Claire, I want you to meet Captain Thomas Reeves. Tom commands the aircraft carrier Roosevelt. Tom, this is Captain Claire Mitchell, the one I told you about. The man in front was tall, with graying hair at the temples and shrewd green eyes that seemed to assess everything with military precision. His handshake was firm, professional. Captain Mitchell, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. John has spoken highly of you. The pleasure is mine, Captain. The Roosevelt has an impressive reputation. Please call me Tom, he said with a slight smile. We're off duty after all. Conversation flowed easily the three of us. Tom Reeves was articulate, intelligent, and, to my surprise, possessed a dry sense of humor that meshed well with my own. When Admiral Peterson was called away by another group, Tom and I continued talking, discovering that we shared similar views on everything from the new class of destroyers to our favorite naval history books. So, he said finally, after a natural pause in the conversation, you're that officer whose photos were spread online by a vengeful ex-fiancé. Froze, the champagne flute halfway to my lips. It wasn't a question, but a statement, direct and blunt. Yes, I finally replied, keeping my voice neutral. That was a long time ago. He nodded, his face unreadable. I read the Vanity Fair article. I use it as a case study in my classes for junior officers about personal and professional integrity under pressure. I didn't know how to respond to that. It was strange to think that my painful personal history had become study material. I hope this isn't uncomfortable, he added, noticing my hesitation. I just wanted to say that I admire the way you'd handled the situation. Many would have buckled under the pressure. I took a sip of champagne, considering my words. It was a formative experience, I finally said. It's not something I would wish on anyone, but I learned a lot about myself. Tom smiled, a genuine smile that lit his eyes. The best lessons often come from the hardest experience. The conversation turned to lighter topics after that. Our experiences at the Naval Academy. He had graduated 15 years before me, our favorite missions, places we had visited thanks to the Navy. As the orchestra began to play, he gave a small, formal bow. Captain Mitchell, would you grant me the honor of this dance? I hesitated momentarily. I hadn't danced with anyone since Ryan, but something about Tom Reeves inspired confidence. Maybe it was his professionalism or the direct way he addressed my past without judgment or morbid curiosity. It would be my pleasure, Captain Reeves, I replied, accepting his outstretched hand. At the end of the night, as the party was winding down, Tom walked me to the hotel lobby. It was a pleasant evening, Claire, he said. I didn't expect to find such stimulating conversation at one of these political events. Likewise, I replied sincerely. It was refreshing. There was a pause. Then he asked, how long will you be in Washington? flying back to San Diego tomorrow afternoon. He nodded, seeming to consider something. I'm based in Norfolk now, as you probably know, but I'll be in San Diego next month for a command comp. Perhaps we can continue our conversation then? Dinner, perhaps? The question hung in the air between us. It was clearly a personal invitation, not a professional one. For the first time in a long time, I found myself genuinely tempted. I'd like that, I replied, surprised at my own certainty. His face lit up with a smile. Excellent. I'll be in touch when my dates are confirmed. We exchanged contact information, and he said goodbye with another firm handshake and a goodnight. Claire, that somehow felt simultaneously formal and intimate. Back in my hotel room, I sat on the edge of my bed, reflecting on the unexpected night. Thomas Reeves was exactly the kind of man I would have imagined for myself before Rihanna, career officer who understood naval life. Intelligent, direct, without games or manipulation. But was I ready for it? After years of focusing almost exclusively on my career, the idea of making room for a relationship seemed simultaneously appealing and alarming. One step at a time, I muttered to myself, slipping off my heels and massaging my aching. It was just a conversation and an invitation to dinner, not a marriage proposal. In the following weeks, I returned to the routine of commanding my ship. We were in port for 2 months, undergoing scheduled maintenance and replenishment before our next mission. It was a busy period, filled with inspections, training, and endless administrative reports. Tom and I exchanged a few emails, light chats about books we'd read during the dance, updates on his preparations for the San Diego conference. It was easy, no pressure. When we finally met for dinner, it was at a small Italian restaurant overlooking the harbor. He was dressed casually, in khaki pants and a simple navy shirt, looking more relaxed than he had during the formality of the ball. You look good, Claire, he said as I sat down across from him. Thank you. How was the conference? Productive, if a little tedious, he replied with a slight smile, but it was worth it for the opportunity to be here tonight. Dinner was surprisingly easy. The conversation flowed naturally, shifting from naval topics to more personal ones. He told me about his divorce 10 years earlier. She never adjusted to life as a military Wi-Fi. Don't blame her. His 2 sons in college, they both vowed never to join the Navy. So of course, my daughter is now considering Annapolis, his house in Norfolk, too big for a single man, but I can't let go of it. I shared stories from my own family, my experiences as a woman in the Navy, even some lightly edited stories about Ryan, not glossing over the experience, but focusing more on the lessons learned than the painful details. It seems we've both had our romantic failures, he commented as we shared a tiramisu dessert. But that's how we learn, isn't it? Each relationship teaches us what we want and what we definitely don't want in the next, assuming there is a next one, I replied before I could stop myself. He raised an eyebrow. You've given up completely then? I considered the question honestly. I didn't give up. I just rearranged my priority. My career comes first, and any relationship would have to work around that, not the other way around. A perfectly reasonable position, he said, nodding in approval. And one I completely understand. When he walked me to my car in the parking lot, there was a moment of potential tension in the air, that classic goodbye moment where something else could happen. Tom resolved this with his characteristic directness. I really enjoyed tonight, Claire. I'd like to stay in touch, see where this might lead if you're willing, but I completely understand if you'd prefer to keep things professional. I appreciated your candor. No games, no pressure. Just an honest declaration of interest and respect for my choice. Like to keep in touch, Tom, I replied, surprising myself with my own certainty. He smiled, leaned in, and kissed my cheek lightly. I'll look forward to it, he said, then waved away, leaving me with a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in years. Our relationship progressed slowly over the next few months. The distance between San Diego and Norfolk meant we saw each other rarely, maybe once every 2 months, when one of us could arrange a quick visit. Most of our connection grew through video chats, detailed emails, even a few handwritten letters, an old-fashioned idea of Tom's that I found oddly touching. It was unlike any relationship I'd ever had. We were both busy with our careers. We both understood the demands and limitations of naval life. And We had both learned hard lessons about compatibility and compromise. 6 months after our first dinner, my ship was assigned to a 3-month deployment in the Pacific. The night before sailing, Tom called me. I wanted to say that I'll miss you, he said simply, and that I'll be here when you get back, if you want me to. I want to, I replied, without hesitation. When I returned from that mission, I requested a transfer to the East Coast, not because of Tomor, at least not just because of him, but because it was a logical progression for my career. Norfolk offered opportunities that would complement my command experience, preparing me for potential future promotion. The transfer was approved, and 6 months later, I found myself living just 30 minutes away from Tom. For the first time, we had the chance to explore our relationship without the barrier of distance. It was eye-opening in ways I hadn't anticipated. The little irritations all couples face, the lifestyle adjustments, the daily commitment Saul of this was new to us. There were moments of tension, sure, but also a deep satisfaction in building something based on mutual respect and understanding. A year after I moved to Norfolk during a weekend at his seaside home, Tom mentioned marriage not as a formal proposal, but as a possibility to consider. "What do you think?" he asked as we walked along the beach. "Is it something you'd consider again?" I was silent for a moment, listening to the waves crash against the sand, feeling the sea breeze on my face. The last time I'd considered marriage, it had been a disaster that nearly destroyed my career and reputation. But this was different. Tom was different. I was different. "Yes," I finally replied. "It's something I would consider, but it would need to be on our terms, respecting our careers, our independence." He smiled, took my hand. I wouldn't expect anything less. We didn't get engaged that day, nor in the months that followed. There was no rush. We were building something solid, brick by brick, testing its strength before fully committing. And then, on a seemingly ordinary day, I received an email from a journalist at a technology news portal. "Captain Mitchell, I hope you're doing well. I'm working on a story about the phenomenon of online misinformation and revenge, tracking some of the most notorious cases of the last 10 years and their impact on today's culture. Your case with Ryan Blackwood was one of the first to gain national attention and set many of the standards we see today. I was wondering if you'd be willing to talk about your experience and how things have or haven't changed since then." My first instinct was to ignore it. Why dwell in the past now when I'd finally moved on? But then I considered the broader implications. My story had helped others before. Perhaps it could help again, especially with the added perspective the years had given me. I showed Tom the email that night. "What do you think?" I asked. "Should I answer?" He considered for a moment. "It's your story to tell or not to tell, Claire. But if you're comfortable, I think your perspective would be valuable, especially considering where you are now in your life and career." After further consideration, I agreed to an interview. The journalist, Anika Patel, was insightful and respectful, focusing not on sensational details, but on broader issues of power, gender, and technology. "One last question," she said as we were wrapping up. "After everything that's happened, after seeing how your story has impacted others, is there anything you would do differently?" The question caught me off guard. No one had asked me that before. "Honestly," I replied after a pause, "not about my major decisions. I don't regret prioritizing nor breaking up with Ryan when I realized he didn't respect my choices. What I would have done differently would have been to recognize the warning signs sooner, the small ways he tried to control situations, the subtle hints that my career was temporary. But that's the wisdom of hindsight. When the article was published, part of a series on digital culture and its discontents, I was surprised by its reception. I received dozens of messages from women in the military, but also from women in other male-dominated careers, all sharing similar experiences of having to choose between relationships and professional ambitions. One email in particular resonated with me. It was from a young lieutenant who had recently experienced something very similar. "Your story gave me courage," she wrote. "When my boyfriend threatened to expose intimate photos if I didn't quit an overseas mission, I remembered what you went through and how you overcame it. I reported him, sought support, and now I'm thriving in my mission. Thank you for showing us that we're not alone and that there is life and a career after this kind of betrayal." I showed Tom the message, feeling a mixture of sadness, knowing that others were still facing similar situations, and gratitude that I had somehow helped. That's why your story matters, he said simply. Because it's not just about you or about Ryan, or even about the Navy. It's about power and choice and how we support each other when we face impossible times. That night, lying next to Tom in his seaside home, increasingly, I thought about the tortuous journey that had brought me here, the toxic relationship that nearly destroyed my career, the years of single-minded dedication to work, the unexpected encounter with a man who understood and respected my ambition because he shared similar values. A penny for your thoughts, murmured Tom, half asleep. Just thinking about how life rarely goes the way we plan, I replied, and how sometimes that's a good thing. He smiled in the dark, found my hand under the covers. An excellent observation, Captain Mitchell. Thank you, Captain Reed, I replied, snuggling closer. Tomorrow we would return to our separate but parallel lives, he to his aircraft carrier, I to my destroyer. We would pursue our careers with the same dedication as always. But now there was something more than just the sea and duty, something that didn't replace or diminish our ambitions but complemented them. A true partnership, built not despite our military careers, but in harmony with them. And if we ever decided to make this partnership official with marriage, it would be on our own terms, not with a grand, unilaterally planned spectacle, not with ultimatums or manipulations, but with the same mutual respect that had characterized every step of our relationship. While sleeping with the sound of the waves in the background, I thought of that young Navy lieutenant I was, facing the impossible choice between duty and love. I wanted to tell her that one day she would find someone who would never force her to make such a choice. Someone who would understand that her commitment to service was an integral part of who she was, not an obstacle to overcome. Someone who, as my father had predicted, would be willing to sail alongside me, not force me to anchor permanently.